We retell the Easter story every year here at St. Stephen's. Every year at Easter time we retell what happened all those years ago on Good Friday, and then we follow on with the sequel on Easter Sunday, of course. Who's seen a good movie recently? Who's seen a great movie? You know, you just watch them and you can't stop thinking about it. Yeah, those movies that stick in your head and you're always talking about them and thinking about what they might have meant and perhaps you even wanted to be part of that movie, you know. That's why I really love that Narnia movie, or the book as well, but the movie shows it where they're sitting at home and they're looking at the painting, so similar, looking at something, and they suddenly start seeing the waves moving and things happening in the painting and the boat, and all of a sudden they realise that it's real, and they end up getting sucked into the painting. Do we know that? We know that story? Yes. Sometimes we watch a movie like that and sort of think, man, it'd be great to be part of this movie. We'll talk a bit more about that soon. So we've been trying to film a movie this morning, obviously. You might not have wanted to be involved in this movie. Just so you know, these cameras weren't on, so you just, if you were ducking trying to get out of the way, the shutters were shut. You might not have wanted to be in the movie, even though they weren't filming, and especially with a director like this, maybe not. Sorry, I didn't know you were going to be in the room when I said that. But what we need to remember always is this is only a shadow, isn't it? A representation or a retelling of the true Easter story. And really we do it to get a feel for those last days of Jesus' life, as we've told right from the triumphal entry this time. To get a feel for those last days leading up to the cross, that he knew was coming, Jesus knew was coming. Get a feel for this Easter story. But remember, it's a true story. And we're retelling the true Easter story this morning. The true Easter story set on the stage of history. The true Easter story whose main character still gets people talking 2,000 years on. The true Easter story that's not just any story, but the greatest story ever told. The most important event of all of history. Why? Because the Easter story is not just any story. It's God's story. It is God telling his story. In fact, God casting himself even in the story of human history. God coming to us in flesh, coming as Jesus Christ to be part of this movie, if you like, of human existence that we're all part of. Now, the story that we see written on the pages of history books doesn't have to be one of meaninglessness and hopelessness. It doesn't have to be like that, which so often is what we see written in the history books or the treatises of philosophers or the rambling of poets. It's so often been the underlying theme of our cultural storytellers, if you like, and especially in the last few hundred years, one of meaninglessness, hopelessness. No, now, because of the Easter story, the true Easter story, it can be one of hope and love and joy. Jesus breaking into history is a turning point. It's a game changer. It's that point in the movie where everything changes. And we reflect that because we have BC and AD. It cuts history in half. Because God chose to act. God chose to act. And when he said lights, camera, action, the scene that played itself out on the stage of history was the most important scene the world has ever seen. The most history-changing event, the most impacting truth, the most life-changing message that ever could grace the pages of history. And that's what we're here today to retell, to acknowledge, to respond to put our faith in. The death of Jesus changed everything. We've been telling the story this morning, leading up, or trying to film the story leading up to Jesus' death, like I said. We saw him ride in to Jerusalem on a donkey to shouts of Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna to the King of Kings. They welcomed him as a king. We heard how he spent some of his final week as he gathered with his disciples, as he talked to them what it meant for him to be the king and for them to be citizens in that kingdom, what it meant to respond to him. And if we read through that portion of the Bible, we see he talked to them about things like loving God with all your heart, soul and strength, loving others as yourself. We saw how he gathered with the Last Supper and broke bread and shared the wine and showed this is what it means to be the people of God. And then we saw in the cartoon just now how he was betrayed by one that was close to him. And so he was arrested and carried off to be trialed. This is the story of Easter. These are the things that happened. And as history tells, he was taken before the high priest, kind of like the Jerusalem aristocracy, the Jewish aristocracy, and then taken on from there to before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, who had the power to condemn death. We can read all about these events, these scenes in the life of Jesus, in the Bible, in the Gospels. And if we read on in these Gospels, and as other historical documents tell us, Jesus, although innocent, is condemned to death, condemned to be crucified. In fact, some of the crowd who only a few days earlier were welcoming him in as a king into Jerusalem are now crying for his blood. Crucify him. Crucify him, they cried. This all happened on Good Friday. The gross injustice, an innocent man being crucified, hung on a tree for crimes he didn't commit. You might have noticed in the bulletin this week that you should have got a copy of, or it's online in the bulletin, of liken the story of Easter to a Hollywood movie. Seems to be a theme at the moment. Now, like I asked, if we watch, like I said before, when we watch a really good movie, it does get ourselves off the edge of our seat sometimes, cheering and crying or clapping or maybe booing. You know, you get those movies or those stories that are really charged with emotion. Often you'll find they're actually movies about true events in history. But these stories kind of pull at something deep inside. And if you like, Hollywood's trying to capture that. And as I said, you sometimes catch yourself thinking, man, I wish I was part of that story. I wish this could happen in my life, or I wish I could be in this movie. You know, something like this maybe. No? Maybe. Getting closer. Yeah, this one, I thought, man, this is a cool movie. And I thought I could be part of this. It sounds pretty cool. I'm sure there's other movies that are even better than the ones I've chosen quickly that we want to be part of. Now, the amazing thing is, and this is the point I want to get to, the amazing thing is that this is the reason why the Easter story, the movie, if you like, that God directs, is a story that we can be part of. We can be part of the greatest story ever told. You see, the story, the truth of Jesus' death is far better than anything that Hollywood can come up with, that they can even hope to produce on a big screen. And what's more, we don't have to watch this from a distance. We don't have to watch these unfolding events and what God's doing. We don't have to watch it from a distance. We don't have to sit in our seats eating popcorn, or for that matter, just coming along here on Good Friday and watching us try to make a movie, the Good Friday movie. No, God offers us a part in His story. He offers us a part because He loves us and wants us to be part of His story. He wants us to be part of His movie, if you like. And he offers us a part through this critical event in human history, through the death of Jesus on the cross. How so? Well, Jesus didn't die for nothing, did he? He died as a ransom for many. Jesus himself says that in Mark 10:45. He died to set us free from judgment and condemnation. He died so that the sin that takes us away from God would be removed. The barrier that separates us from God would be broken down. This is the truth of what Christ has done. You see, our natural inclination as humans is to do our own thing. Self-sufficient, especially Kiwis, I don't know about especially Kiwis, but Kiwis, she'll be right. Number 8 wire attitude, right? Do it yourself. It translates spiritually. Do it yourself. Self-sufficient. Number 8 wire spirituality. It doesn't work. This sort of attitude is actually at the heart of what we call sin. It's at the heart of what separates us from God. In other words, it's an attitude that thumbs its nose at God and so tragically separates us from Him. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, we read in Romans. Yet in spite of us rejecting Him, He does not reject us. For God so loved the world, the self-sufficient, do-it-yourself, God-rejecting world. That's us, that's you and me. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him would not perish but have eternal life. Whoever believes in Him would not be under judgment, would not be separated from God, but find life in God. John 3:16. You see, Jesus died for us. He took on my sin so that I might be free from condemnation. He took on my sin so that I would be free to know God, to serve Him, to love Him, to be in relationship with the King of the universe. And it's when you believe this, when you trust Jesus as God's Son who died for you, it's then that you realize that you're part of this movie that God is directing, part of the story, part of God's story. And that's an amazing story to be part of. Up until a cold winter's morning in London when I was 25, I was directing my own story. I was doing everything that I wanted to do. And I didn't care much about what God wanted, really. He was kind of there, but as far away as He needed to be. I didn't care much, really, when it came to it about other people. My sin, although I didn't call it that at the time, was causing me to walk in the wrong direction. I was directing my own life. It was only when I gave my life to Christ and realised that it's not about me, it's about Him. He died on the cross for me. And it wasn't until I said, Lord, forgive me. Lord, take my life and start directing it for what you want. And I remember it was like I'd suddenly let go of the paddle as I was trying to paddle upstream and make my life what I wanted it to be. And all of a sudden I was going downstream. And in a way I was out of control. But the river that God had put me in, if you like, was taking me in the direction that He wanted. And I realised that I was part of the most amazing story ever told. And again, it wasn't about me. It was about Jesus. Now, just to continue with the movie theme, the great thing about all this is that you don't need an audition to get in. You don't. You don't need to, front up to God and show Him how good you are. How well you can sing or act, or how many good things you can do for people. How many good deeds you can do for God. If we tried to do that, no one would be accepted into God's cast. Right? Now, the important point is here, though, is that the reason that we don't have to audition is because Jesus has done it for us. He has lived a life, a perfect life in every way. A perfect life in every way required. And so has died a death that is a perfect sacrifice in every way required. Such that his audition is accepted. His sacrifice is accepted. And we simply can join the cast, if you like, by saying yes to Jesus. Trusting him in his death for salvation, for relationship with God, for true life as part of God's family. In other words, we can be part of the greatest story ever told. We can be part of this movie whose main character is Jesus himself. And that's what we're remembering on Good Friday. That's what we're responding to. That's who we're saying yes to. You know, I tell you that if Hollywood movies, Hollywood movies have nothing on this, right? I truly believe that if we could grasp the depth, the reality, the extraordinary nature of God's love in this Easter story, the story of Jesus on the cross, then I think we would give up watching movies altogether. We would, because faith in Jesus is the real thing, not just a shadow, superficially defined or weakly alluded to as movies can only really do. Faith in Jesus is real. We become truly part of God's story of salvation, God's story for us, the center of which is Jesus' death on the cross. I want us to think about that as we listen and watch. Think about, where are we in this story? At what point are we at? We've heard the journey of Jesus to the cross. We've thought and seen how he died on the cross, and that is for us. Let's now come to a point to say yes to Jesus. And that might mean it's the first time you've ever said yes to Jesus. Or it might mean a recommitment of our life to Jesus today, this Good Friday, when we retell this most amazing story ever told.